It's my pleasure to be with you again this evening. Just as we passed the halfway mark of our health series and our series on Revelation, I was thinking, wow, now it's almost the end. It's just going so quickly. So tonight I am going to talk about stress, and in the title I put a question: is it the frenemy of health? And I don't know if, language is always changing. And, we add new words to language. Language is almost like a breathing organism. It's evolving and changing over time. And, just in the last few years, at least in the US, there was this kind of new word that was invented called frenemy. Have you heard of this word, frenemy? I don't know if you've heard of this word or if it's popular in the Philippines, but frenemy is a combination of two words, kind of mixed together. It's friend and enemy. So young people use this word more because the thought of frenemy is somebody who is kind of your friend, but kind of your enemy too. So it's a strange, you can imagine if someone is like this, then it's a complicated relationship that you have, right? And so actually, I was just using this term because stress is like that for us too. You may think, stress is only an enemy, but actually, can stress be your friend? That's kind of a novel, new concept. So we're gonna talk about that a little bit today. And maybe you may agree that it can be a little bit of both. So what is stress? You may think that from the beginning of time, or at least from the beginning of sin perhaps, there was stress. And so I was surprised in my research about stress to find out that the actual term for stress, as we understand it today, feeling, how can I say, feeling stressed, feeling nervous or anxious about certain things, was first coined in 1936. It was actually by a medical doctor. He was an endocrinologist. Endocrinologist is a specialist in hormones and hormone-related diseases. And he actually originally was from Europe. He was from Hungary, but later went to Austria and finally Canada. But he was the first one to describe this kind of psychological stress. The word stress itself, has been in at least the English language for a long, long time, but it was previously used to describe more scientific concepts and not psychological concepts. So he was the first one to use it in that way in 1936. And as with many things in science, he looked at mice. And he eventually, with this theory of stress, formulated something called the general adaptation syndrome, which describes how our bodies respond to stress. And he also said that there's different types of stress. We know the word in English, distress, right? If I'm distressed, this is a negative stress, right? Because you are anxious or perhaps worried about something, or even, mad about something. Now, he also talked about eustress, which is actually good stress. And some examples would be, let's say that, for our students, you're going to school and you apply to college, and, you're having stress thinking about, is this college going to accept me? And then, you get a phone call or letter saying, oh, you've been accepted. That's good stress, right? Because you're happy. Or if you're engaged and about to be married and you're making preparations for marriage, it is stressful, right? But it's a good stress, right? Because it's for a happy occasion. So he described that there was both good and bad stress. So with the stress that we're most familiar with, this negative type of stress, he said that there were certain stages to stress, and he did name these. Alarm stage, which is what we usually know today as the stress response, this fight or flight response, resistance, and then exhaustion stage. So there are many definitions of stress out there. Somebody said to you, how can you define stress? There's a lot. And I've just listed some here, but some are like, the one at the bottom I like because it's kind of balanced, a physical, mental, and emotional response to some type of challenging event. So in this definition, you see that stress is not just psychological. You actually have physical manifestations of stress, emotional and mental. So it involves, all parts of your body. So the fight or flight response you've probably heard of, right? This is kind of how we traditionally think about stress. And this term fight or flight was first described by a Harvard physiologist, Walter Cannon, in 1914. So this is the instinct that scientists say we have when we are under stress. And a very easy example is, let's say that you're home at night sleeping, or better yet, let's say this. Let's say for some reason late at night you are walking down a dark road by yourself. And, it's not such a safe area, but for some reason you are walking down this road and, there's nobody on the road except you. And then you start hearing these footsteps behind you. So you look behind you, and there's this kind of strange-looking person, not very friendly-looking, and they come closer and closer to you. Your heart might start beating faster. You might start sweating a little bit. You might be thinking, are they going to rob me, right? So at that point, your body starts this fight or flight response. Your heart starts beating faster. You may start breathing faster, your blood pressure will go up, your mouth may feel dry. And the thought is basically that it's getting ready to do one of two things. You might either fight this person literally, or you may want to run away, which is the flight part. So in stage one, and this is obvious, right? You get stimuli, information, through your five senses, right? In this particular example, you are hearing someone come closer to you. When you look back, you see the person, right? And you may even hear the person if they say something. So, you're using all your senses to process information. And then, in step two, your brain obviously has to interpret this information, right? As you're getting the information, your brain is thinking, okay, so what shall I do? It's getting ready to make a decision. And of course, it stays aroused. It's getting ready for some type of action in stage three. And then in number four, by this time, you've made one decision or the other, right? It's either you're going to run away or call the police, or you're going to turn around and say, why are you following me, right? Something like that. And once that's done, you've made your action. Stage four, ideally, is what is supposed to happen, which is your body is supposed to go back to normal. So your heart stops beating fast. You breathe normally again. You relax, and that's what we call homeostasis, when your body goes back in balance. So this is the fight or flight response. Now, and these are some of the things we mentioned. Your blood pressure goes up, heart beats faster. The other thing too is your body only, heightens the response for things you need during this time. So during this time, it's not that important, for example, to digest your food, right? You can digest your food later. So it will, your digestion will slow down, but other things will speed up, like your muscles will become more tense because your muscles are getting ready for some type of action. Now, along with these responses that you can measure, you actually have hormones associated with them. And so these hormone responses originate, as you might imagine, in the brain. And so initially what we see is the hypothalamus. This is a very small area in the brain, but it's small but extremely important. And the hypothalamus is kind of like the control center for many of your hormone releases in the body. And so the hypothalamus, which is here in the brain, it's kind of this tiny area compared to the rest of the size of the brain. But it releases a hormone, this corticotropin releasing hormone, that activates something called the pineal gland. Also a very small gland that's located pretty much underneath the hypothalamus. So it tells this pituitary gland, okay, you have to release another hormone. So the pituitary gland releases this hormone, ACTH, into the bloodstream. And then from the blood, it goes to the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is another small gland. It's sitting right on top of your kidneys, one on each kidney. It's almost like your kidneys are wearing a little hat, and the hat is your adrenal gland. But it's small but very important. Your adrenal glands release, among many other things, stress hormones, among the most famous being cortisol. You've heard of cortisol, right? We've talked about it. This is the stress hormone. And then also adrenaline and noradrenaline, right? Sometimes we say in our everyday language, something really got my adrenaline going, right? And so this is really one of our stress hormones as well. Adrenaline is also known as epinephrine. And so all of these hormones help us in the stress response, and they help regulate all those things, the blood pressure going up, the heart rate increasing, your mouth getting dry, your muscles getting activated, etc. So now that we've talked a little bit about like the physical and hormonal manifestations of stress, I want to talk a little bit about the psychological ones. So, a lot of psychologists, psychiatrists have said that, from the time that human beings are conscious, we have stress. And if you've ever heard of Sigmund Freud, right? He was one of the famous psychiatrists in Europe many years ago. And so he had this concept where he said that human beings, from when they're born into an environment where, you have to have stress. It's inevitable. And without going into too much detail, he talked about 3 elements that contribute to our stress. So one was called the id, the ego, and then the superego. So the id is the an example would be if you say, I want chocolate, I want to eat some chocolate. And so the id represents, according to Freud, just kind of the desires that you have. And it could be anything. It could be, I want chocolate, or I want ice cream, or something like this, right? And it doesn't really have reasoning behind it. It's just like, I just want this because, I want to eat something sweet, for example. Then you have your superego. This is like your conscience. So your conscience is telling you, oh yeah, you want chocolate, but you're on a diet or you're trying to watch your weight. So this is represents your conscience. And then the ego, he called it kind of like your reality. So it balances your id and your superego. So your ego says, okay, you want chocolate, you're on a diet, so the compromise is you eat a small bar of chocolate instead of eating a lot. And so what Freud was saying is that you always have this tension between just kind of your basic desires and then your conscience. And you're always trying to, figure out what to do, and then you have reality. So Freud's argument was, that's one reason you have stress, because you're always trying to, work between these 2 minds that you have going on inside of you. So this is just one approach. And this up here is because he was German. This is kind of the German way that he described it. So let's look also physically. So some people will say, stress is all in your mind, So if you can just kind of regulate how you think, then, it's not really a physical thing. It's more just in your mind. So you just have to figure out how to think better so that you have less stress. So I wanted to just briefly bring to your attention a very fascinating phenomenon in medicine. And this is just a slide illustrating, this is a well-known phenomenon in actually cardiology or heart diseases. And there is a syndrome called broken heart syndrome. So you may think broken heart syndrome may be something where you break up with your girlfriend or boyfriend or something like this, and then you have a broken heart. But actually, medically speaking, there is a syndrome called broken heart syndrome. So it has another name too. But basically what happens is if you have a very, very stressful life event. It could be something like the death of a loved one. It could be a very stressful financial or job situation, but something that's very stressful. And frequently, it can be over a short period of time or a longer period of time. I remember having a patient with this syndrome in our hospital at Loma, and she told me that, I asked her, did you have some very stressful event before this happened? And she said, yes, for about 3 months, I had like severe family stress, and she was telling me what it was about. But what happens is you have this very stressful event or stressful period in your life that actually stimulates the adrenal glands to produce, a lot of stress hormone, and that actually affects your heart. The symptoms of broken heart syndrome are such that it's just like a heart attack. People literally have chest pains, and they have all the symptoms of a heart attack. Actually, when you come into the hospital with these symptoms, we cannot tell if you are having a true heart attack or not until a little bit later. And so it has all the, even the blood tests, everything are consistent with heart attack. And then what happens is, once these patients have what we call an angiogram, that is a study where they inject dye into the blood vessels going around your heart, and they actually see that none of them are blocked. They're all open. But what's caused this response is stress. Actually, like a severe outpouring of stress hormones. And the good news about these patients is that they do recover most of the time completely from this problem. So their heart goes back to normal, but usually takes a few months. So this is an example of how medically you can actually have a true medical condition from just severe stress. Even in the Bible, there's talk about, this spiritual warfare and stress. And even the Apostle Paul, if you especially read the chapters in Romans 7 and 8, you see this kind of spiritual battle, this stress that he was having. So in Romans 7, he's talking about this stress about the law of his mind and then the law of sin. And, they're fighting against each other. And, at one point he's kind of in despair. He says, "O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from this body of death?" So you can see in his writing the struggle, like the stress he has from this spiritual warfare. And then you see in Romans 8, it's kind of the resolution. As he puts his trust in God, he has hope here. He says, "There is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus." And at the bottom he says, "For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus hath set me free from the law of sin and death." So you see kind of this, the struggle he has, and then in chapter 8, this resolution. You can almost say that he has like a return to spiritual homeostasis or spiritual balance. Now, some people have said, some people have stress-prone personalities, right? Some people are more easygoing and laid back. Some people are more intense. And you've probably seen many different ways that personality is described, right? This is just one way, but there's so many out there. So in this particular one, scientists or psychologists have talked about like type A through D personality. You may have heard of type A. This is probably the most well-known. These are very intense people. They're driven, ambitious, competitive. So they tend to get things done. The sort of negative part of their personalities, they tend to be very impatient and stress-prone. And they had found that type A personalities tend to have more stress, actually. And so they're saying, these people need to kind of relax a little bit. Now, type B is almost the opposite. They're more relaxed and laid back and cheerful. And I will just say, as we go through C and D, none of these are, or all of these, most people are a mixture of personality types. Usually, you're not just one personality type. These are more like extreme examples of, a spectrum of personality. So most people are mixtures, but you may say, well, I'm most like a certain personality type. You may say, I'm most like A, or I'm most like C. Type C personalities are very systematic. They like to do problem solving. They're also very sensitive. And then type D tend to be kind of very pessimistic people. So, but as I said, most people are kind of a combination of personality types. It is helpful to know, most people know what your personality tends to be like individually, and awareness of that can help you also deal with stress more effectively. Now, we also know that it's not that we should have no stress. Scientists have told us and have seen that we have to have some stress in our life because, as we mentioned earlier, there's good stress, there is bad stress. And the thing is, if you had no stress at all, no good and no bad stress, it would be very hard to wake up in the morning and be motivated about anything. We all need a little bit of some kind of thing to push us and get us going. So this bell curve is to kind of show you that here's performance, achieving things, doing things. Here's your stress level. So the best is kind of here in the middle. You want to have some balance. If you have too low stress, your performance is not going to, you're probably not going to do anything, likely. And if you have too much stress, that will lead to burnout and disease. So kind of this middle area where you have just moderate amount of stress is where you'll have your peak performance. Now, the cost of stress, worldwide is staggering. So in the US, they estimate that cost to businesses is over $300 billion as far as people becoming stressed and missing work and getting diseases because of the effects of stress and also poor performance in the workplace. So it's a staggering amount of cost for this not well-managed stress. And they've also found that over 40% of job turnover, so people quitting their jobs, is related usually to job stress. And that's also a very high number, right? That's almost 1 in 2 people. And they've also found that in the US, about 75% of healthcare costs are related to chronic illnesses, which are frequently driven by stress. So, it's amazing that if we could control stress better in the US and, worldwide, you could save a lot of healthcare costs, And so this is a huge kind of area that's, I don't know if it's been neglected or people kind of know, but they're not really practicing how to manage stress better. They found that younger Americans tend to have more stress than older Americans, people on the eastern side of the US more than the western side. And men tend to have more stress and not make changes, really, even though they know they have stress. So this is also true in the Philippines. As the World Health Organization has said, stress is a worldwide epidemic, and so it's not going away, and it's getting worse and worse as time goes on. I saw an article here in the Philippine Star from, I think this is from 3 years ago, which said that in the business world, Filipino executives were among Asia's most stressed business people. And this was based on surveys they had done of business executives in the Philippines. So I know you have some stress here too. This is from CNN from last year, where they interviewed Filipinos and they said, what are your top causes of stress? And what they said here is, and I think this is similar for many countries too, they said that the biggest stresses that they found here were job-related or studies in the case of students. And then you can see here, I think traffic just beat out by a little bit financial. So job, and then traffic, and then financial, and then other things like life changes, personal relationships, health, etc. But it looks like jobs and the traffic and finances were really big stressors. And these are very essential parts of our life, right? We cannot cut these things out of our life. As much as we would like to avoid traffic, you just can't, right? So stress and heart disease, we talked earlier about broken heart syndrome. I just wanted to briefly mention that in the journal Science, even in monkeys, so they say, monkeys are not so different from human beings, right, in some behaviors. And researcher named Jay Kaplan had taken 2 groups of monkeys just to illustrate how stress affects heart disease. So he had 2 groups, they were both in cages, and in one group he just left them alone. Both of the groups ate low-fat diet. They ate low-fat, low-cholesterol diet. It was a healthy diet, so it's the same. And one group was left peacefully alone. The other group, what they would do is every once in a while, they would introduce a new monkey into the group, into the cage. And I guess with monkeys, as kind of is the same as human beings, what they did was, I guess monkeys, when a new person or new monkey is introduced into the group, they have to kind of find their social standing. Especially if it's a male monkey, I guess what they do is they fight, and then they see like who's stronger, and then they establish like a social order. And so they noticed that in this group where there was always this new stress introduced, these monkeys had a lot more heart disease. And because everything else is the same except for this stress. So you can see that stress certainly contributes to heart disease. And there have been many other studies that kind of verify this. So let's look briefly at the management of stress. We're surrounded by stress, good and bad. Frequently, sometimes there's more bad than good. And actually last year, I was in Korea, and I actually taught a class at one of the universities in Seoul. I happened to teach a class called stress management. And I will say that even though I taught this class, I cannot really tell you that I have no stress or that I'm an expert in stress. But, one of the things we went through during the class was different techniques for stress management. And there are many. So this is not even a comprehensive list, but I just wanted to highlight a few for you. So, and all of us have different interests, and each of us, if I were to ask you, what helps you relieve your stress, or what helps you relax, you would probably all tell me something a little bit different. So some people like to write. So journal therapy. I'm one of those people. I actually really enjoy writing. When I was an undergraduate in college, my major was English, and I love to read and write. So I actually relax partially by writing. So for those of you who like writing, journal therapy. Some people are very art-oriented, and you may like to paint or draw. Humor therapy. One of the things I found is that for people who live very, very long lives, when they come into the hospital or when I meet them, I usually ask them, what's your secret to living a long life? And they usually tell me, among other things, is they will say something like, I don't really take myself too seriously, or I find they have a very good sense of humor. So humor therapy, it can be very helpful. If you can laugh sometimes at stressful situations, that can be very helpful. Behavior modification. Sometimes just the way we respond to stress and our behaviors can actually, even sometimes we don't feel like it, can actually decrease our stress levels quite a bit. Communication skills. So, the age-old classic example of this is they always say that men and women have different languages, right? Men think differently than women. And so one of the stress relieving techniques is just to help people, men and women or otherwise, communicate effectively. So time and resource management, this deals with, are you using your time effectively? Are you stressed out because, you're wasting time, or you're not prioritizing your time correctly? And resource management is how to manage your money. A lot of people are stressed about financial things, but one thought is, are you on a budget? Are you using your money wisely? Are you investing wisely? Social support groups. I think that is a huge area where, especially for challenging conditions like certain diseases like cancer. There are cancer support groups or other disease support groups, etc. And these can be immensely helpful in dealing with some of these very challenging conditions. Hobbies. So you may have, unique hobbies that you do that can help you relieve stress. Music, massage, deep breathing. I think these kind of are self-explanatory. If you exercise, you know that exercise in and of itself is stress relieving. When you exercise, I tend to run for exercise. And I know that when I start running, it's uncomfortable, I'm hot, and I'm short of breath in the beginning. But when I'm done, you have such a good feeling. They call it, sometimes runner's high. And that is just like the outpouring of beneficial chemicals and hormones like endorphins in your body. So I know for me, running is very stress relieving. Being thankful, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Forgiveness, prayer, and faith. So many of the spiritual aspects of our life can be very conducive to relieving stress. Okay, so let's talk about spirituality and health. So spirituality is a hard thing to sometimes quantify scientifically. In science, the thought is always, that you don't believe it unless you can measure it, right? And you cannot always really measure spirituality, but they do try. And so they found in various studies that people who have an intrinsic spiritual orientation, by intrinsic that means, you have a personal relationship with God, and, you may go to church, and because some people actually, will go to religious services to have social relationships or because it's good for business, right? So that's more extrinsic, but intrinsic is you have a personal relationship. So people like this have been found to have, decreased levels of stress itself, and then also if they have stressful situations, they have a better ability, they have better tools to handle stress. They tend to get less depressed, and they're also tend to be less afraid of death, usually because of the nature of their faith. And they also report greater feelings of well-being, just being satisfied with their life. Now, poor nutrition and stress. So you probably know from some example in your own life that if you eat certain things or don't eat certain things, this can affect your stress levels as well. So nutrition is actually very important too in the management of stress. It's well known that if you eat excess amounts of caffeine, sugar, salt, and refined flours, these actually will weaken your body's response to stress. And I know sometimes, if you feel stressed, actually these are some of the very things that you crave, right? You may crave something that's very sweet, or you may want to, drink caffeinated beverages, etc. But unfortunately, those types of foods and beverages will be counterproductive to actually helping you manage your stress response. So if you remember this, if you're stressed, you actually want to avoid these foods because they can actually make your stress response worse. A high-fat diet also will contribute to stress by weakening your immune system. And as we said, excess simple sugars, so that's more refined foods, and we mentioned caffeine. And chronic stress will also deplete some of your major vitamins. Okay, so the benefits of gratitude. So being grateful, being thankful is really important. A famous Christian writer said that there's nothing more that promotes the health of body and soul than having gratitude, a spirit of gratitude and praise. And modern science also backs this up. So gratitude, being thankful, reduces stress. And also, if you have significant traumatic events in your life, it can actually help you navigate those much better. I want to give you a short example of this. And I want to be mindful of time, but when I was in Korea last year teaching, I had a very interesting and sort of eye-opening interaction with some of my students. So these were actually first-year college students. So they were probably, I don't know, 17, 18, 19 years old, depending on, when they came into college. So they were very young, and we were doing a class that was related to kind of, understanding moral principles and, making good decisions in life, this kind of thing. So I asked them a very simple question in one of our sessions. I said, okay, we're going to go around the room, and I want you to tell me one thing that you are grateful for, one thing that you are thankful for. And I was amazed by this. I was amazed because these students could barely think of one thing they were thankful for, just one thing, right? Not even 10 things. And I had to wait quite a long time for these students to think of something they were thankful for. And, finally, one student, after several minutes said, I'm thankful that my mother makes my breakfast in the morning. So I was just like, wow. I mean, you should be thankful for that. But what struck me was how these students, it seemed like they just did not know how to be thankful, or, they had not practiced being thankful. And so I said, as we talked more, I said, make it a habit to try to be thankful about something every day, because this is good for your health. This is good for your physical health, and this is good for your mental health. Interestingly, Korea has one of the highest rates of suicide in the world, and very, very high rates of depression. And, I don't know that these students represented the whole population of Korea, but I was just thinking, is this why people, commit suicide and have so much depression? Because they're not thankful. So I would encourage you. I do this too, very consciously. I try either every morning or every evening when I wake up or before I go to sleep, I try to think of at least 5 things that I'm thankful for, and it could be very simple. You could be thankful the sun is shining. You could be thankful, you had a good night of sleep, or you had a good day if it's the evening. But it's a huge blessing to be thankful, and it has real benefits for your health, both physical and mental. So I think something went wrong with my slide here, but this is an article from Time magazine which talked about forgiving people is good for your health. So this is another challenge I have for you. As we live our lives, there are certainly times when there are difficult situations, and someone or even some group of people may do something wrong against you. And so you have 2 choices. You can forgive that person or that group of people, or you can bear, how can I say? You can bear a grudge, or you can be, resentful against a person or group of people. But, at least the scientific and health evidence shows that actually forgiving people is good for your health. It's actually associated with real measurable physical improvements in health, both physical and also psychological. Okay, I need to hurry along here. So, I don't know if any of you have ever watched TED Talks. In the US, TED Talks are very popular. They're usually talks by well-known people about topics that people are curious about and interested in. I just wanted to bring your attention to this TED Talk, How to Make Stress Your Friend. This actually was first done by a Stanford psychologist named Kelly McGonigal. And she actually presented this, and this particular TED Talk went viral on the internet. So you can see here, I just looked at it today, and there are over like 11 million views of this talk. But just even the title is very interesting, right? It's How to Make Stress Your Friend. And so basically what she says here is that most people think of stress as a negative thing, and she did too, even as a psychologist. She said, you have to avoid stress, etc. But her assertion in this talk, it's about less than 15 minutes, is that stress should actually be your friend, or can be your friend. So she cites a few studies. I'm going to try to go over them very quickly. So in the first study, she says, at the University of Wisconsin, they looked at 30,000 American adults for 8 years, and they found that like we might predict, about 43% of the people in the study who had a lot of stress, so high levels of stress, had an increased risk of dying, but only if they believed that stress was harmful. So, they would ask them, do you have a lot of stress? Yes, let's say. And then the other question was, do you think stress is harmful to your health? And if the participants said yes, then they followed their death records later. They found that these people tended to, be more prone to die. But if people said, I have a lot of stress, but I don't think that stress is harmful to me, they actually didn't have any increased risk of dying. So that was a very interesting finding. So in the second study, this was from Harvard University, they actually monitored patients' hearts during times of stress. And what they found is normally, and this is the normal stress response, when you are under stress, the blood vessels around your heart will constrict. They will get smaller so that less blood flows. If you have this situation too long, it's bad for your heart because you don't get, enough oxygen, etc. But what she found is in this study, they said that one group of patients, they trained them by saying, look, stress is not a negative thing. It can be beneficial for you. It can actually help you be more efficient and be more effective in your work. And for those people, they actually had relaxed blood vessels like this. And so they actually showed that just by educating people to understand stress better and to see it as something more positive, as more helpful, these patients actually had a different, physiologic, their body actually responded differently based on their belief. So lastly, the last study that she talked about was another university in the United States where they found that for every stressful major life experience that a person had, this would increase the risk of death by 30%, which is a lot, unless, so this is a big unless, unless they also spent a significant amount of time helping other people, so loved ones and neighbors. So for those people, there was no increase in the risk of death. So the connection they found was, you may have had a lot of stress in your life, but if also in your life you helped other people, then that actually, zeroed out, that kind of erased the increased risk of death that you had from stress. So this is another thing they found. To help other people decreases your stress. God knows, and the writers of Scripture knew, that we all face, significant stresses. They did in their day, and we do in our day today. And so there are many promises in the Bible related to stress. Some of my favorite ones I've listed here. I'd like to look at the one here in the middle in Philippians, which says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God." So I know that as you sit here in the audience today, all of us have some kind of stresses. There was a time when I used to think that there were some people who had no stress. It seemed like their life was perfect. But as I've lived life, I have seen that everyone has stresses. Nobody is immune. And so these promises in the Bible, and the special thing about the Bible is that the words in the Bible are not just words, right? They're promises, and they have power, because if you claim them, they can come true for you as long as you have faith in them. So I would encourage you today, as you go through your daily lives, in addition to some of the stress relieving techniques that we have talked about, please also claim the promises that God has given to us, that He will be with us in the midst of our stress. And there are some things that only God can help us with. And so I encourage you to look to Him as your chief source of stress relief. Thank you very much.
Coming Broadcasting Network.